Want dis ons land, dis ons taal, en sonder soek kan ons gaan stories haal. Waar we lewe in die duine, hoog gebouw uit sand, die helder see en die goue straat. Die landskap wat oor generasies vertel, die harte wat in ritme met die golwe val. Ons land, ons
Dag sê, ek staan vandag op hierdie woensdag aflewering vir Jomarie Daddy in op Kletskompas, Republikein se geselsprogram. Nou in ons onderhoudsegment kan jy gesprek sien wat ander kykers eers heel wat later vanaand in Business 7 se program sal sien. Onlangs het die president van die Bank van Namibia, meneer Johannes Gawaxab, banke gevra om te belê in bedrywe wat veral produktief is sodat dit die ekonomie bietjie lewe kan gee. Nou, Jomarie het met die Ekonoom Salomo Hei oor hierdie versoek van die regering gesels. Woensdae in Market Watch is dan natuurlik altyd ook 'n mediese fokusblad en Henriette Lamprecht vertel in die mediese segment 'n bietjie meer daaroor. Ons is nou terug.
As die vorige keer, maar dit was nie hulle beste spel nie. Hulle spelpatroon is baie voorspelbaar. Hulle moet regtig werk daarin. Het hulle 'n plan B? Baie geluk aan Moody. Ek dink ons het baie meer jong bloed in die span nodig. En mense wat kan skep.
Die nuusstoel is Ageto Greg vandag. Nou Ageto, soos jy daar gesien het, daar's weer 2 pryse van 1000 Namibiese dollar op die spel in Republikein en DStv Namibië se rugby raai kompetisie. Môre aand is dit Australië wat teen Nieu-Seeland tuis speel en Suid-Afrika die naweek weg in Argentinië. Is jy 'n rugbyman of meer 'n sokker ondersteuner?
Meer sokker dan, ja.
Nou ja, ek dink die Springbokke sal natuurlik wil hê dat Australië dan tuis die punte kry teen die All Blacks, sodat hulle 'n bietjie op die punte leer kan help. Kom ons kyk na vandag se voorblad Ageto. En ja, mooi blommetjies daar in die suide, daar naby die bocht, Loerits bocht. Maar kom ons zoom in op die hoofstorie hieronder. Nou, gratis wifi, nog te duur sê hulle, maar so, daar is nie eintlik gratis wifi nog in Namibië nie. Maar dit gaan hier oor die universele diensfonds, wat eintlik deur die wet daar gestel is, waar bydraes inbetaal moet word om gratis internet te voorsien aan, veral dink ek, jy weet, behoeftige gemeenskappe in Namibië. Maar Ageto, tot nou toe het daar nog dadels gekom hiervan.
Ja, dit het alles na vore gekom weens die staande komitee op ICT wat maandag openbare vergadering gehad het met belanghebbers in die bedryf. Dit volg na parlementslid Modestus, vroeger die jaar die mosie in die parlement geopper het en toe was dit verwys na die staande komitee. Hy het gevra dat as land moet ons plekke in plek stel waar mense gratis wifi kan, toegang tot gratis wifi kan kry, tot die internet kan kry. En gister het hy nou die verskeie redes gehoor hoekom dit nou nie so is nie. Die land is al 'n tyd besig om daar te probeer uitkom en die fonds is gestig soos hy gesê het, maar daar was verskeie hofsaake wat gevolg het, spesifiek in verband met die bydrae wat geëis word vanaf die verskeie diensverskaffers. Kraan het gevra dat 'n persentasie van hulle inkomste outomaties na hierdie fonds toe moet verskuif word. Dit is onwettig verklaar, so daar is nog geen geld daarvoor nie. Maar in die navorsing en voorbereiding wat Kraan gedoen het, weet ons dat daar so wat, of ten minste honderde toringe moet opgeradeer word en nog so amper 34 of so toringe gebou moet word om te begin. Hulle wil begin by skole en klinieke in geïdentifiseerde plekke landwyd. Want hulle se plan was om nou hierdie torings te bou en dan oor 7 jaar die torings winsgewend te laat maak, gebaseer op kernkliënte, dit nou die skole en die klinieke. Daar is nou natuurlik nie geld vir die torings nie, maar ook baie van die skole het nie krag nie. Hulle is net nie in stand om gekoppel te word nie. So ons moet eers daai struikelblok oorkom voor dit kan geskied. So daar's nog baie werk om te doen. Die parlementslid is nog altyd hoopvol. Hy sê daar is baie van die rolspelers wat gewillig is en hulle wil help. So ons soek nog 'n uitweg hoe dit eendag miskien gaan gewaarheid word.
Net vir die kykers natuurlik, byvoorbeeld op Keetmanshoop het hulle redelik onlangs het 'n diensverskaffer en die munisipaliteit 'n gesamentlike projek bekendgestel om gratis wifi aan dele van die dorp reeds beskikbaar te stel en dan wil hulle dit uitbrei.
Ja.
Maar jy weet, die versoek was, ek dink is op jou bruto wins is dit 1,5% wat die telekommaatskappye in die fonds sou moes inbetaal.
Ja.
So dit is 1,5 sent op $1.
Ja.
Dink jy dit is 'n realistiese vereiste as jy nou so daarna kyk? Dis ek meen 1,5 sent uit elke $1.
Ek dink nie of dit 'n realistiese vereiste is of nie, is regtig 'n kwessie. Daar is lande waar dit erger is en lande waar dit nie aanvaarbaar is nie. Ek dink die tekortkoming was in die skepping van die wet in die eerste plek en die regulasies wat daarmee saamkom. Ek dink as dit beter gedoen was, dan sou die howe nie probleme daarmee gevind het nie en dan was ons nou tree nader aan algehele toegang tot die internet in Namibië.
Ja, wat sê julle? Laat weet ons. Natuurlik moet wetgewing val ons maar dikwels vas in Namibië en ook regulasies wat die grondwetlikheid en die wetlikheid daarna uitgedaag word. Ons gaan gou terug na die voorblad toe. En is minister Kletskompas, die man verantwoordelik vir landbou, wat in hofstukke vir Job Amapanda van die regstellende herposisioneringsbeweging bietjie gas gee, want hy sê hy het eintlik nou net 'n groot kwessie gemaak oor die rooi lyn vir politieke gewin. Kletskompas wat ook sê die beskerming van ons bek en klou vrye status byvoorbeeld is nie iets waarmee 'n hof enigsins gemoeid kan wees nie. Dis die werk van die uitvoerende gesag en wetgewers in die land.
Ja.
So 'n sterk bewoorde repliek daarso en dan gaan ons gou net saam met almal op die binne toe blaai. Op bladsy 2 kan jy lees oor president Gawaxab wat natuurlik gaan reis ook na Engeland vir koningin.
Ek het gedink dis baie interessant hoe ons dit daar stel want ek het nie eintlik gedink dat daar 'n lys is en dat net sekere mense genooi word. So miskien is dit 'n goeie ding dat ons staatshoof genooi is.
Ja, ek dink is goed altyd as 'n land gesien word op belangrike plekke en dan op bladsy 3 kan jy lees oor bek en klou seer en nou veral hier op die oosgrens met Suid-Afrika wat 'n noodspan ook seker maak dat die bees wat daar op die grens van die twee lande wy nie dalk bek en klou na Namibië kan laat spring nie.
Ja.
En ek het ook dit is 'n tragiese moord en verkrachting gewees, so 4 jaar terug daar in die Karibib distrik. 'n boer wat deur 'n man vermoor is met 'n byl, sy vrou is verkragt en sy wat nou getuig het ook in hierdie saak ter verswaring eintlik. So
Ja.
Om te wys eintlik hoe sy dit ervaar het en ek haal aan hierso, dit was vernederend het sy getuig. Hy het my van my waardigheid gestroop. Ek kry steeds terugflitse van daardie dag.
Nee, dis iets om mens hartseer te maak en kwaad te maak. En ek sien hier aan die einde van die berig die beskuldige vat ook 'n kans daarom te sê was hy in sy regte gedagtes hier oor misbruik van dwelms.
Die hof kan baie keer natuurlik juist bevind dis 'n verswarende omstandigheid daai.
Ja.
As jy onder die invloed van drank of dwelms was, ook het ons blaai sommer net so vinnig bietjie aan nog stories daaraan Kusê wat nou geld insamel vir hulle hofsaak waarin hulle wetgewing en regulasies oor dierebeskerming wil uitdaag en hulle soek 3,5 miljoen. En ek wil net so gou Beatrice Masilingi wat 'n slag vir die 200 gehardloop het en gewen het. So dis goeie nuus vir ons, maar ek dink die oë begin nou skuif Algetto. Eers na Papua Nugini, waar die Eagles, Namibië se nasionale span teen daardie land en die VSA speel voor hulle dan in Oktober in Australië by die T20 Wêreldbeker weer gaan aanmeld.
Ja, ons maak naam in cricket.
Nou ja, jy kan daar op die sportblaaie vandag lees ook, die span is gister aangekondig, so die spanlys is ook daarso. Dankie Algetto.
Baie dankie.
Volgende kom die spotprent en dan 'n bietjie mediese raad deur Henriette Lamprecht, gevolg deur die onderhoud.
Kos as medisyne is dalk 'n opkomende konsep in die westerse wêreld, maar bestaan al eeue lank as die hoeksteen van gesondheid vir baie kulture reg oor die wêreld. Mense wat toegang tot voldoende voeding het, is meer geneig om sterk immuunstelsels, 'n veiliger swangerskap en bevalling, lae risiko van diabetes en kardiovaskulêre siekte te hê en hulle leef ook langer. Daar is egter geen enkele definisie van die kos as medisyne konsep nie, maar dit verwys gewoonlik na die prioritisering van voedsel en dieet in 'n individu se gesondheidsplan met die doel om of simptome te voorkom of te verminder of dan nou om die siektetoestand nou om te keer. Dit is veral gefokus op die verhoogde gebruik van verskeidenheid heel minimaal verwerkte plantgebaseerde voedsel en dan 'n beperkte inname van hoogs verwerkte voedsel wat ryk is aan bygevoegde suiker, olie en sout. Het jy geweet water is die belangrikste voedingsstof en een van die gesondste kosse op die planeet is spinasie.
Welcome to Salomo Hei. He's an economist, independent economist in Namibië. Salomo, over the weekend, the Bank of Namibia issued a statement in which Bond Governor Johannes Gawaxab appealed to a more productive uptake of more productive credit in the country to try and stimulate the economy. What is the current situation with private sector credit extension in the country?
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning to your viewers. So yes, I think generally there's been a bit of a subdued in terms of the performance of the private sector credit extension, both on the household and business side. Obviously, it was constrained by COVID and the general low economic environment or low economic activity that was prevailing. Since the rebound of economic activity, I don't want to call it a recovery, I call it a more economic rebound from the low base that we are coming from. We have seen a bit of an uptick in credit extended, right? But you would remember that the Bank of Namibia is, it's a cry for help. They have put out a 500 million facility with banks towards SMEs. And the performance of this facility has not been up to speed. It's been below par. And subsequently, they are reaching out to banks to say, what is the credit criteria in terms of trying to unlock a certain level of economic activity through a facility that sits with the commercial banks. Now, you would also be aware that there was, as part of the financial sector strategy, there was the credit guarantee scheme that was also put with the banks. In the context that it sits, I think, with the DBN, but some banks have signed up to use the facility. So essentially what this facility do, or the functionality of the facility is of such a nature that you as Joe Mary go for a loan application at one of the financial institutions. The business application is viable and feasible. The banks approves it, but because the credit criteria request that you should put down collateral. Now, in the absence of collateral, you then go to the facility to be able to raise the necessary collateral to mitigate any risk. Now, what has happened is that there's also been a very low uptake on the credit guarantee scheme, right? So these are two interventions that has come in, but unfortunately, it's not delivering in terms of the desired outcomes. So what you have is still you've got a 500 million facility that's sitting there, it's not being utilized. You've got a credit guarantee scheme that should mitigate the risk in terms of collateral. And yet the credit extended in terms of the productive side of the economy is very low. So what the Bank of Namibia governor then cry for help, if you will, was that a bank should come to the party to see to what extent they can look at obviously responsible lending, but at the same time look at on what basis can they potentially accelerate lending towards SMEs, lending towards businesses, lending towards the productive side of the economy. So essentially, it's within that context that you've got facilities that should unlock the necessary value. Unfortunately, they are not being utilized because the supply and demand side are not talking to each other. And subsequently, you have the subdued private sector credit extension.
In your opinion, what are the major factors subduing it from the demand side? Why aren't people applying for business loans?
Well, firstly, I think they could be applying, right? The application, obviously, in terms of the credit criteria, because I think there are very few businesses that are in good standing because of the current economic environment that we find ourselves in. But if you go further and analyze where the growth or where the uptick in private sector credit extension has been, is around advances, right? So generally, what does advances mean? Advances mean that I've got a small restaurant, right, that was closed for a considerable period of time. It's open now. I'm getting more feet in again. So what I do is then I go to the bank and tell the bank that, or ask the bank that, look, I've got patrons coming in again. Look at my past week sales that I had. I need to stock up, and then I go get an advance for a week or for a month. And as soon as I'm able to pay, as soon as I get the cash flow in, I'm then able to honor my advance obligation. Now, ideally, what you would want to see is facilities, right? Because of how the business cycle works. Sometimes you take 2 to 3 months to get going, and you would want a facility with a bank. Now, because of where we are coming from, and because of the lack of cash flow over that period, and because of the general low growth environment that we find ourselves in, facilities are hard to come by. So there is a certain level of applications that are going through, but obviously the credit criteria is not speaking to the times. So, and this is where we find ourselves.
You say that the criteria isn't speaking to the times. Do you think banks are over hesitant to provide credit or grant credit? And to which extent should they be more accommodative?
Well, I think the banks generally, and I think it's really an observation from my side, is that banks generally in the Namibian market are very risk averse. I mean, if you look at the ratio between borrowings and the deposits, you could see that it's massive. The amount of deposits that we have in the bank in relation to the borrowings, which are very low. So they don't really have a huge appetite for lending, right? That's the one thing. And there could be reasons why. One is obviously, I think, the regulatory regime obviously also put you on alert in terms of capital adequacy that you need to hold on your books at a certain point in time. The regulatory regime also puts you on alert in terms of the non-performing loans that you need to keep within a certain period of time. But I also think that one should understand it in the context of where we find ourselves. This is not a normal economic cycle that we find ourselves in, and subsequently, one would have expected some level of flexibility, because this is essentially what the Bank of Namibia is advocating for. And subsequently, one would have wanted the general banking environment to also follow suit. And so in terms of why the banks don't have appetite to, say, fund businesses, and to what extent they can become accommodative, I think that obviously there's been a general interest rate cut during COVID, right? And obviously that did have an impact on the margins of the banks, because remember that they are in the game of interest rate variation, interest rate margins as profits, right? So I'm sure that the uncertain period did put everyone on alert, and to the banks and to the bank's credit, obviously they were concerned that the uncertain period did not have an end in sight at that point in time. So I'm sure at that point no one knew till when will the interest rate cut continues, right? So they sort of wanted to build buffers around that as well. That's why the whole COVID relief measures that were announced in terms of payment holidays for those in good standing. Again, it didn't make sense, because why would you give someone payment holiday while they're in good standing? You know, you would want to give someone who is in financial distress a payment holiday. And when you're in financial distress, technically you would not be in good standing, right? So those are some of the issues that one need to navigate around. But it's an open conversation that we need to have in the context that the banks really need to understand that where risk is mitigated, and especially mitigated with these credit guarantee schemes, and where there are facilities that are sitting there should be a certain level of flexibility with regard to making sure that lending can propel economic activity. And I think it's within that context whether that bank should become accommodative. I mean, if the credit guarantee scheme quota is completely maxed out, it makes sense for the bank to maybe take a cautious approach and on the side of caution out of an abundance, right? Out of an abundance of caution. Now, in the current scenario, what we have is that there's been a very low uptake on the facility that's sitting there because of the credit criteria impediments. And then there's also been a low uptake on the credit guarantee scheme in terms of the security aspect of loans. So I think if you take those two scenarios, one would have wanted the bank to bring a certain level of flexibility and be accommodative in that respect.
Salomo, as you've said, this is an ongoing conversation, a developing story. Thank you for your insights for now. We will certainly make contact with you again as this whole thing unfolds. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The world has become more interconnected and dependent on technology as ever before. Advances are growing at an exponential rate, with quantum computing, AI, machine learning, and data analytics allowing information systems to learn and adapt to the human needs, conditions, and conundrums. When Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, introduced the term Fourth Industrial Revolution, one of his key statements was that this fusion of technologies that are blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres would not only change the way we live, but they would change us. In this year's Telecommunications and Technology Focus magazine, we hone in on the hottest tech trends, most sought after skills in the evolving workplace, and how local companies, global giants, and gurus operating out of their garages are changing the world and manifesting whole new ones. Whether you're a business or a boffin, this Focus magazine seeks to be your go-to guide to latest developments in tech, telecoms, data, and skills development. Contact us today so that we can tell your story and take your product or service to servers around the world.
Dankie dat jy saam gekuier het, en as jy op hierdie klein Saterdag 'n bietjie vanaand die dorp gaan inkleur, geniet dit, maar onthou om ook veilig te wees. Môre is Kletskompas weer terug in jou voorhuis of by die werksplek, of maak nie saak waar jy na ons kyk nie. Totsiens.